Moving our way to the front of the vehicle, the first and most important thing to point out is that of the added cast texturing done to the bottom plate, as well as the front glacis plate as well. This bit of detailing does help the look of the model compared to leaving it stock and smooth. Moving to the bow M1919, this was modified from the kit original. First, an ECA M1919 machine gun ball detailing was added. This simply gets mounted directly over the stock Henlong unit, as the Henlong kit is missing the ball cover. As for the machine gun barrel itself, this is an aftermarket version from ABER. This set is made from CNC'd brass and consists of a couple components. The pieces are very nicely done, and I've used them on several 1/16 builds in the past. The ABER sets are modified, though, to work with the radio control model, in that the ABER set has a solid brass barrel and a integral barrel tip. The stem for the barrel is removed. The tip is drilled out on the lathe, and in place of the brass barrel is that of a fiber optic. The fiber optic gives you the detailing of the barrel and also helps the machine gun flash on the tip of the machine gun barrel, as opposed to leaving it on the inside with that of the flashing LED. Moving on from the 1919 takes us to the bow headlights. Now, the bow headlights on this model here are greatly improved from the kit originals. First, the actual headlight itself. The stock version of the headlight is very crude in its appearance, and rather than trying to tweak and improve the look, I simply went ahead and replaced it altogether with a new casing from ECA. The ECA casing gives you that of the World War II pattern headlight, and it still uses the stock LED. You simply insert the LED from the front, and you don't even have to remove any of the wiring, so it's a simple installation. With the ECA replacement piece, it greatly helps the detail of the headlight compared to the stock original. As for the brush guards themselves, the brush guards on these Pershings are very unique in that they connect to the fender, and they actually connect to the front glacis plate. Now, they are not symmetrical, and on the version that is located near the machine gun, the piece actually connects and welds directly to the machine gun blister. Also on the Pershing, the little storage canister is found on the inside portion of the brush guard, as opposed to the outside, which is found on Sherman's. Another bit of detailing that was added to the brush guard is that of the little strap support, which we have here, which connects the brush guard directly to the base that holds up the headlight. On the opposite side, it's similar, but a lot different in its basic shape. And this is due to the fact that there is no large machine gun blister found on this portion of the hull. Rather than connecting to the blister or to the glacis plate, on this side here it connects directly to the tower, which holds up the headlight. And then the strap connects to the top portion of the tower as well. Moving on from the headlights takes us to the tank siren. The siren detail that you see here is from ECA. The Henlong kit does not contain the siren detailing, however it does contain the siren's brush guard. As for the siren itself, it is mounted to the fender with that of a steel strap, which is present with the ECA piece. Also present with the ECA piece is that of the electrical wire, and on the Pershing here, emerges from the side of the siren and enters into the vehicle from the front glacis plate. Moving from the siren takes us to the bow hatch area. Now, the bow hatch area is another distinguishing portion that separates this tank and distinguishes it as an M26 as opposed to a T26E3 or even an M26A1. On the T26E3, when the tank was first developed, there were two backup periscopes found in these two locations here on the front. Shortly after the tank went into further research and development, it was realized that these two backup periscopes were simply not necessary, so they were removed from the tank's design. However, once removed, the hull still had these two holes found in the front casting in which the components would be mounted. What was done was that rather than installing the periscopes, two steel plugs were mounted in place and then welded shut. The steel plugs that you see here are a new addition to the EastCoastArmory.com product line and are a drop-in installation for these 1/16 scale M26 Pershings. They will not only work on the Henlong, but the Tegan as well as the Tamiya as well. To install the ECA sets, they're very easily done. This is done by first drilling out the sections that are found molded into the tank. When the sections are drilled out, you simply mount in the ECA units as a plug from the inside portion of the model. The ECA sets have their B detailing present. Now, what's also interesting to point out was that when the vehicles were further developed and the M26A1 design started coming out, the front casting was changed. Rather than having this round bulged air blower, the M26A1 has a squared off appearance. In addition to that, the locations for the periscopes are no longer present and it's one solid steel casting. From the blower takes us to the bow hatches. The bow hatches are stock. The only mod was that of the periscope detailing. The periscope detailing on the bottom portion is a 3D printed unit found from Shapeways, and these 3D printed units have been used on several builds in the past. The difference though is that the 3D printed unit comes with an integrally printed on periscope brush guard. These brush guards are very nicely detailed. However, one criticism about them is that they are equally as fragile. For this tank, since it is built for commission going to a customer, he requested to have the fragile 3D printed brush guards replaced with that of these metal versions. The metal ones you see are made from a cast metal and are supplied by Shumo. The Shumo sets have become a little bit more scarce lately, so if tracking one down may be difficult. However, the sets are highly recommended as they are a lot more stronger and more robust compared to the 3D printed offering. However, the 3D printed periscope bases are more than suffice for the job, and the Shumo brush guards connect directly to the 3D printed base. Moving from the hatch takes us to the M26 fire extinguisher. Just like with all American tanks of the period, there was an external fire extinguisher mounted in this location here of the hull. Now, what's unique about the M26 series of tanks is that they use the same fire extinguisher housing found on the M5 Stuart. The difference, of course, between the Stuarts and the Shermans is that the Sherman utilized 2 fire extinguisher handles, while the Stuart only utilized 1. This set here is not found on the Henlong model and is actually a new component found on the ECA product line. Now, what's interesting to point out is that the Henlong tank has provision for mounting 2 of these fire extinguisher boxes, one on which would be found on the opposite side. This is incorrect, as the Pershing only utilized 1 fire extinguisher box and was found in this portion here only. The one found on the opposite side was simply deleted and was no longer an issue. Also, we can see is that the entire top portion of the bow hatch area has its added cast texturing present. This is true for not only the top portion, but also on the rear portion as well. The added cast texturing is another way to help bring up the model to more detailed specs, as opposed to leaving it with the smooth texturing found on the stock model. Now, if we notice, to make things and keep things a little bit differentiated, I did not add any cast texturing to the hatches and left them with the smooth texturing found on the original kit. This does help the pieces stand out as opposed to leaving everything with a cast texturing. Moving our way back to the engine deck, most of the engine deck detailing is left stock, as the molded versions found on the Henlong model are pretty good. One area to pay attention to is that, though, of the radiator cover. As for the radiator cover, the mods that went into it are as follows. Cast texturing was added to the piece, which improves it from the smooth stock offering. Also added were the fastener details, which were missing on the stock piece. Now, just like with the bin lids, there are a few perforations found on this piece here in order to attach the crew equipment. So on this model here, bodywork was used in order to get the piece to the smooth appearance that you see here in the video. Moving our way to the transmission axis hatches, the only other mod that was made was that of the hatch stops. These pieces were absent on the stock model and were fabricated out of pieces of stripped plastic. Once added, it also helps the model compared to its stock original offering. Moving our way to the tank's turret, the turret also received a lot of mods, just like what were made to the hull. First of which, the number one mod that was made was that of the cast texturing. The entire turret that was found on the stock Henlong version was smooth and was void of any type of texturing whatsoever. The texturing was all added with my usual format. In addition to adding the texturing, I went ahead and deleted the seam which separates the top and lower portions of the turret. On the stock Henlong model, the turret's held in place with that of a few fasteners, and in the back portion here of the bustle, there are 2 holes in order for the mounting of the fasteners. These hole locations were deleted, and the turret has are permanently glued together, thus giving you the seamless appearance that you have here on the model. From the texturing takes us to the foul weather driving hood rack. This rack here is a distinctive piece found on the M26 and M46 series. The purpose of which is to store the foul weather driving hoods, which would be mounted on the bow hatches when the weather is inclement. When not in use, they get folded up and stored in these 2 locations right here on this rack. Now, the rack itself is the original Henlong version. It was used. However, as for mods that were made, not too many were added. First of which is that of this center divide. Now, the center divide is one piece of detailing that is found on the Tamiya version of the kit, but was omitted by Henlong. The piece here was a simple piece to fabricate. It was added with a piece of plastruct square and was simply mounted in the location along with the sculpted well beads that you see on the other locations. In addition to the well beads and the center support, I also went ahead and added small little tie downs. These tie downs are made from small little pieces of wire and are present on the real rack, as this is how you would strap in the foul weather driving hoods to prevent them from rattling loose. Moving from the rack takes us to the tank's track jack. Now, the M26 family is also distinctive in having 2 track jacks found on the tank's turret. As for the jack itself, the version that you see on this model is a Henlong unit. However, just like with many of the other components which were added to this tank, the Henlong units did have some shortcuts made to them. Namely that of missing the secondary rail as well as the threaded rod. On the real track jack, the way the system works is that you have these 2 rails on the jack housing, and the clamp rides along the rails, and on the inside here you have a threaded section which is controlled by this ratchet, which would be on the outside. To tighten it, you would stick in a steel rod and you would turn either left or right in order to loosen or tighten the piece. Now, to fabricate the missing detailing, the second rail was fabricated out of a strip of plastruct, and the rod was added with that of a little tiny piece of wire. The hole for the ratchet was drilled out, and by doing this little conversion also greatly helps the look of the track jack compared to just leaving it with its stock configuration. Moving our way to the rear bustle of the turret takes us to the 50 caliber storage equipment. When the 50 caliber would not be in use, it would be mounted in this location here, and the barrel would be removed and put into these little clamps that are located on these pieces of angle iron. Now, the barrel clamps as well as the cooling jacket shroud are all stock. These were supplied with the Henlong model and were adequate for the detailing found on them. The only additions that were made were that of the sculpted well beads to add the final detailing to them. As for the storage panel itself, this was the East Coast Armory Wrestling version, which was recently added to the product line and was a simple drop-in replacement for the stock one found on these Henlong models. Moving our way to the left-hand side of the turret first takes us to the shell ejection port. The shell ejection port on this model here is a stock offering and was simply mounted to the turret. What was done to the shell ejection port, however, was added cast texturing to the hatch itself, as well as blending in the splash room area into the rest of the turret's casting. Another mod that was made was a small little divot was added to the top and bottom portion of the ejection port hinge to give the illusion that the piece is functional, which is also found on the real unit. Moving from the ejection port takes us to the secondary track jack. This features the same modifications which were mentioned in the previous scene. From the track jacks takes us to the engine hoist lugs. This is one feature that carried over from the T26E3, and many of the M26 production versions utilized and still retain these lugs. However, once the tank got upgraded to M26A1 specs, most of those vehicles had the lugs totally omitted. As for the lugs themselves, these are the kit original units. As for any mods that were made, a hole was drilled into the end portion of both of these lugs here, as they are found on the real units. In addition to the hole, weld beads were also added. Moving from the lugs takes us to the spare track. Now, the spare track rack that you see here is a new addition to the EastCoastArmory.com product line. The stock Henlong kit does give you the track to mount in this location here. However, it is very basic in its appearance. The ECA resin set contains the track pads themselves, along with the clamping mechanism on the top and bottom portion of the tracks, as well as the internal frame that we have here. The frame also has sculpted weld beads pre-present on the casting, so the piece is a drop-in installation. Now, when adding the ECA set, you will have to delete the slot that is molded into the side of the turret for the insertion of the original piece that was kit supplied. Moving our way to the mantlet of the model leads up to another new addition to the ECA product line, and that is of the rotor lug mounts that we have here. As for the stock original unit, the stock original unit has an inaccuracy in the presentation of this piece. The stock unit has a molded plastic tube that comes out of either side, kind of like Frankenstein bolts. However, on the real M26 Pershing and M46 series, it would be in this format that you see here. The ECA set is a drop-in installation for that of the Henlong tank. The way the Henlong model is broken down is that when you take apart the turret, the halves, the entire mantlet cluster will actually slide off of the top portion of the turret casing, to which then these small sections here will slide outward, thus allowing you to replace them. The ECA set is a direct replacement for these stock Henlong pieces. In addition to swapping out the side panels, I also went ahead and thoroughly blended everything in with that of the cast texturing. Cast texturing conceals the seams and makes everything for a nice seamless appearance that has the texturing which is present on the real vehicle. Also visible at this point here is that of the tarpaulin rails, which are found on the front of the turret as well as along the mantlet itself. These are just fabricated out of strips of wire that were bent to shape and glued to the locations that you see. Moving our way to the tank's mantlet, the mantlet also receives several mods. First of which, the coaxial M1919 machine gun location is absent on the stock Henlong kit and had to be indexed and drilled out. Moving our way to the opposite side of the mantlet takes us to the gunner's optic. Now, on the stock Henlong model, there is an LED which protrudes from this section here, which notifies the user that the tank is about to fire the airsoft BB. This feature hurts the look of the model, and on the real M26 Pershing, the piece is actually interesting is that there's a step down type hole where you have 4 or 5 visible insets, and the hole gets smaller as it goes deeper inside of the armor. This is to protect the optic from any sort of shrapnel or a stray bullet. To repair the piece, I went ahead and fabricated a new component which was also added on the ECA product line. This is a drop-in insert, which is very similar to what was designed for the Tiger 1 that I also released a little while ago. While on the Tiger 1, the insert replicates that of the MG34 coaxial machine gun, on this one here, it's just that of the Optic. However, on the inside portion of the mantlet is a recess, so you can still keep the LED, and you just insert it into the insert, and then the insert gets mounted into the mantlet in the way that you see here. With this setup, it allows you to have the correct detailing for the mantlet, and you still have the LED light for that of the airsoft gun shooting notification. In addition to the insert, all of the cast texturing was also applied to the mantlet as well, giving it for that nice rocky appearance that you see on this model. Moving our way to the tank's gun barrel, the gun barrel on these Henlong Pershings are inaccurate. And what I mean by that is that the overall shape of the barrel is slightly thicker than what would be found on a true to 1/16 scale tank model. The reason why this was done was for that of the BB firing capability, as the stock scale 90mm gun barrel is not large enough in order to shoot the BB. Now, even though the barrel is somewhat thicker than the scale 1/16 scale barrel, it is one of those type of features that most people just tend to live with, as the barrel doesn't look too obtrusive and is not so much of an eyesore. Now, one mod that does need to be made to the gun is that of the end section here. One of the defects found on the Heng Pershing is that the gun barrel is too short. The reason why Heng went ahead and made the barrel shorter than it should be was purely so that they could fit it in a certain size box. This was something that was also done to the Heng first generation Tiger 1s that came out back in 2005. Only, unlike the Tiger 1, in which was upgraded and improved throughout the years, the Pershing tooling actually kind of fell by the wayside, and outside of changing one or two small features on it, the barrel was left unaddressed. So the barrels on not only the Heng but the Taken tanks as well do need to be lengthened. As for the lengthening procedure, this is also a new piece found on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. What the ECA said is, it is a resin extender which goes between the muzzle brake and that of the barrel. To install the ECA piece, you cut the muzzle brake off at the collar. By cutting it off at the collar, the ECA piece then gets mounted to the barrel, and the muzzle brake gets connected to the end of the ECA collar. By doing this, you have the barrel now at the correct length. Now, the ECA component is drilled and is hollow so that the piece can still fire the BB. Once the seams are blended in, it gives you the nice seamless appearance that you see here on this 90mm gun, and the gun is restored back to its correct length. Moving upwards towards the turret roof takes us to first the Vane Sight. The Vane Sight that you see here is a stock version from the Heng kit and was modified in having its little holes drilled in, which are found on the real unit. Moving from the Vane Sight takes us to the searchlight. The searchlight that you see here is a 3D printed component from shapeways.com and is found at the link listed below. I've used the searchlight in another build in the past, and it is beyond recommended. Moving our way to the rear bustle of the turret takes us to the first 50 caliber travel lock. Now, the 50 caliber travel lock is based off of the stock versions that came with the kit. However, were modified. If you notice, the piece is fully functional. Now, the piece was designed to work on the stock original Heng unit. However, the assembly was more flimsy. The way the Heng version was you had the travel lock base with that of a large plastic lug molded on the inside. The travel lock pivoting section had a tab that was open on one end in which you would simply click it in. This unit is very flimsy in my opinion and can easily fall off. Rather than using that route, I went ahead and removed the molding clip, drilled out a hole in the center of the stem of the travel lock, and then replaced the lug with that of a pin. By pinning everything in place, you still get the functionality of the piece, but it's a lot stronger and more robust in my opinion. Moving from the travel lock takes us to the tank's MP48 spring antenna base. Now, the stock Heng version has a machined metal lug that is found in this location here. This lug is a carryover from the earlier units in which there is a spring antenna which would get mounted to that location. As we recall, the original unit had the antenna mounted incorrectly here on the rear portion of the vehicle. With the tank being 2.4 gigahertz, there's no need for an external antenna, and so the piece that's found in the turret is purely there just for detail purposes. The piece, however, does look inaccurate and does hurt the look in detail purposes. To replace it, I swapped it out with the EastCoastArmory.com MP48 spring antenna base, and as you can see, the piece is fully flexible. Now, if you notice, there's currently no antenna wire mounted on the base. That is because, for shipping reasons, the antenna was left to be removable. When the customer gets the tank, it's strongly advised to add a little drop of super glue to the bottom portion of the antenna and simply insert it into its location. Moving from the MP48 takes us to the secondary antenna, which on this model here, it's that of an MP65. The MP65 is another unit from East Coast Armory, and it's made in a flexible resin, which on the real MP65, this black section here is actually made from rubber and is fully positionable. Now, like I said in the unboxing portion, this area here is a carryover from the Tamiya full option kit, in which there's a large unsightly slot in this location here for that of the old style whip antenna. The well is present, and to to improve the detailing of the tank, a disc was added on top of the well, which is found on the real vehicles, to which then the MP65 simply mounts directly to it. Moving from the antenna takes us to the M2 50 caliber and its pintle mount. The pintle mount that you see here is the East Coast Armory.com resin version. And as for the machine gun itself, this is actually a 3D printed component from Shapeways. In addition to the machine gun itself being 3D printed, the carriage that the machine gun is mounted on is another component from Shapeways and is also found in the video description. The two are sold by different vendors, however, they scale up perfectly and mate to each other without any problems. The reason why I went ahead and went for an aftermarket machine gun was that the stock 50 caliber that comes with the Henlong model is very soft in detailing. This is true for just about all of the 50s that have been supplied by Henlong in the past. However, on the Pershing, the 50 caliber cradle is so basic in detailing that it was easier just not to use it at all. And unfortunately, when it comes to these 50 caliber machine guns, the cradle is basically the heart of the system. Here I have a section of the Henlong version. Now, at first I was going to modify this receiver and mount it into this 3D printed carriage. The problem, though, is that if we notice on the Henlong unit, there's a large hole as well as the molded in carriage assembly that would have been more strenuous and more time consuming to polish and delete away. Rather than doing that, it was simpler just to go ahead and mount the 3D printed 50 to the carriage. Now, the carriage itself looks a lot different than compared to the other units, and that's because this is not the M23 cradle and carriage mount. The M23 was a little bit different in appearance in that it had a large counterweight spring located on the side of the mount. This version is a correct version, and I believe this might be called the 3050 mount, but I might be mistaken. The 3050 mount was a special mount that was designed to adapt not only for the M2, but also for the M1919 as well. The mount was very prolific and was used throughout not only World War II, but Korea and onwards. These mounts here, like I said before, was made from Shapeways, and it is a very well detailed and well scaled component. The piece, as you can see, can pivot up and down, and what's so interesting is that the piece is actually printed as one unit, and when you clip off some of the little accessories that come with the set, the component right out of the get-go is already pre-hinged, which is very impressive. As for the 50 caliber gun itself, the 3D printed unit was nice in its appearance in that it had a nice accurate receiver section. However, on the version I received, the barrel was slightly warped. More than likely, this was due to the fact that I had this component sitting in its box and its wrapper for a period of time, and it probably had another object sitting on it which caused the barrel to bend. With the barrel bent, it was easier for me just to replace the whole unit instead of trying to straighten it out. As for the entire detailing that you see on this piece, the gun was upgraded with the ABER M2HB 1/16 scale upgrade set. This ABER set I've used on many of the 1/16 builds that have been posted on the ECA channel in the past. The ABER set contains a CNC'd metal barrel, CNC'd brass cooling shroud, as well as the sights, which are all photo etch, the butterfly trigger assembly, the spade grips, as well as the charging handle. These components, once added to this 3D printed gun, really make it shine compared to just leaving it with the stock molded in pieces. Now, the stock 3D printed pieces were not terrible, specifically on the spade grip area. However, since I had to replace the barrel section anyway, I might as well go ahead and use up the whole ABER set. Moving our way to the tank's paint and the markings. Starting with the tank's paint, the tank is painted in an overall darker shade of olive drab compared to the lighter World War II shades. This was a feature found on very late war and post-war American vehicles. The darker shade of olive drab, since this tank is being built for Korea, would be more appropriate for an M26 Pershing. Now, many vehicles were still painted in the World War II shade in the Korean theater of operation, so it's not inaccurate to have a tank for Korea with the World War II shade of olive drab present. Now, as for the vehicle's markings, this vehicle is built for an M26 Pershing of the 73rd Tank Battalion, which was in the summer of 1950. The tank itself was named Margaret, and Margaret was a real M26 Pershing from this period. Now, the choice of the markings as well as the certain color that's found on this model here was specifically requested by the customer, as he wanted this particular version of the Pershing. It is also because of this combo was why I went ahead and made and fabricated many of the M26 details which were mentioned earlier. If the tank was built as a T26E3 Pershing, just with these markings, it would be inaccurate. Now, as for the tank's markings, the markings that you see on this model here are a mix between spare Archer dry transfers as well as spare Tamiya decals that I've had on hand. The Tamiya T26E3 kit does give you, in the decal sheet, the markings to build Margaret, which is ironic because the tank out of the box is a T26E3, and if built out of the box with these decals, like I mentioned before, are going to be built as an inaccurate form. However, the Archer dry transfers consist of the star on the front as well as the star on the rear of the engine deck. Just like I've mentioned in the few times that I've used the Archer dry transfers, they are very good quality and went on without any hitches. As for the remainder of the tank's markings, these would include the name as well as the unit and tank number. These decals here were the Tamiya ones and went on without any issues, as the Tamiya markings were also very high quality. The markings themselves were applied, they were solidified with that of a lacquer, and then were blended into the tank's paintwork. Now, just before I go ahead and take the tank for a test drive, let me just walk through that of the radio. The radio that this model has is this 2.4 gigahertz radio here. The radio was mentioned in the unboxing portion, and this is the previous generation of the Heng radio. These kits are still fairly prolific with the following setup. The newer versions look very similar to this, however they have two little buttons here on the top which control several of the functions and changes a little bit of the layout and how the tank is actually driven. I will now power on the tank. Just like with all RC tanks, you want to first turn on the radio and turn on the model. Now the tank is turned on by a single power switch, which if we notice here I indicated in red when in use. Just like all Heng and Taken tanks for that matter, when the power is on and the tank isn't started up, you will see the headlights flashing. To turn on the tank, that's done by hitting this little switch that has an icon of a padlock, to which it will start up the sound system. Now the sound system has a few ways to control the volume. That's done with the volume button here. That is the shape of a V, if I can get it to focus. It has 3 or 4 settings for that, the volume. Currently, I'll leave the volume low as I'm still talking into the microphone. The button with the S is that of your smoke system, which is the standard Heng smoke system. While the system puffs away, it's important to point out that to refuel the smoke system, unlike many of my other builds in which there is a filler spout on an alternate location, on the M26 Pershing that's not necessary, as the exhaust manifold goes directly into the smoke system, and getting access into there with the supplied smoke fluid bottle is not very difficult. Now, the smoke system on these tanks are not proportional with that of the throttle, so no matter how much or how little you throttle the tank, the smoke system outputs at the constant rate. To shut it off, you simply hit the button on the radio and the system deactivates. As for the other functions, the G that is on this location here is that of the machine gun. When I press the button, it's going to trigger the sound system to have the machine gun noise, and it's going to have the LED flash. Now, like I said earlier, the machine gun has a fiber optic in it, which makes it easier for the viewers to see the actual machine gun firing. The last button is K for cannon, and what this does is this simulates the tank shooting. Now, it does not fire the BB, it just has the tank jolt backward as to simulate recoil, and it triggers the sound system to make the cannon shooting noise. Now, as for the other functions, this stick here is purely drive, which is stock on all these Henlong models. Forward and reverse. Now, this tank does have a proportional drive system, so if I give it a little bit of throttle, it moves very slowly. And if I give it more throttle, it goes a lot faster. And of course, there's gradations in between. Now, one thing that's important to point out about these Henlong radios is that on the bottom lever here, there is a trim feature. This lever is found on the other sections of the radio, but these are purely for show and don't do any purpose outside of aesthetics. It's important to point out that if you notice, I went ahead and put a red line on this location here, as it's very easy to accidentally bump into this section here, which will throw the trim off. If you're driving the tank and you notice it's performing very strangely, in which you're trying to give both tracks throttle and only one side is moving faster than the other, that's because your trim has been bumped out of the way. The reason why I have the red line is so that you could quickly visually check to see if everything is at the proper location. The other stick here is purely for its turret functions. Left and right rotate the turret. And as you see, the tank does have a very smooth turret turner. Now, the turret does not spin 360 degrees. It has a 180 rotation to it. To elevate and depress the gun, that is done by going down on the radio. This, being the older style system, means that the gun works on a track, and the gun can only go in one direction and then the other, as it's in a loop. When you want to elevate the gun, it's going to first go do its procedure, and then it'll go up again. And it'll do this as long as you hold down onto the stick. This is one setup that has been changed with the current generation system, in which to elevate and depress the gun, you go up to elevate and down to depress. To fire the airsoft gun, this is done by going up on the radio. If you notice, I put a little red dot here to indicate that of firing. Now, the tank does, since it's the older model, does have the cutoff switch, which is found in the loader's hatch of the tank. In addition to the cutoff switch, this is also the spout to where you reload the gun by putting the BBs into its channel. The gun is currently set to be on, to which I will trigger the firing. If we notice, the LED lights up, and like I said before, this was moved to the inside portion of the mantlet with the new ECA optic set. That's for the M26 Pershing. Also, if you notice, when the tank is not moving and you fire the gun, it will also trigger that of the recoil. When the tank is in motion, the recoiling system does not activate. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and put some mileage on the model. I'm going to first crank up the volume, turn on the smoke, and start driving. As you can see, the tank performed pretty well for the terrain that it was placed on. Now, like I said before, the tank was upgraded with that of the high performance ball bearing steel gearbox, as well as the metal tracks, which in this type of driving, you can see is definitely something that is going to be holding up better, specifically with this type of media that I'm driving on, compared to that of the plastic components which were originally supplied with the model. Also, the speed on the tank is a lot more true to that of the real M26 Pershing. This was again because I swapped out the blue high performance motors and reused the original motors which were supplied with the model. Now, one final bit, you'll notice that when the tank is turned on, like I said before, the bow headlights are flashing. Now, the tank does have functional rear taillights, however, they do not turn on unless you actually turn on the tank. I will now go ahead and de-dust and de-grit the suspension of the model, to which then it will be packaged up and off to the customer it will go. I'll see you guys later back in the shop. And with that, that concludes this model showcase video for this 1/16 scale, radio-controlled, Korean War era M26 Pershing. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this model that are posted, as well as many of the other smaller scale and larger scale builds that are frequently posted on the video channel. In addition to that, don't forget to stop by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.